Well, good morning, Patriots. How are y'all doing
Good
today?
morning.
Morning, Joel. How's your week
Morning,
been?
Ben. My week has been pretty busy. A little bit hot and muggy out here, kind of Texas weather.
Oh,
A little bit,
interesting.
just a little bit,
Nice.
as much as us wimpy Californians can take.
Morning, Michael, or shall I say Ezekiel or Zebediah or some
Oh,
other ancient prophet name? You're giving very prophet beard vibes going on.
representing the Old Testament wisdom, the wise of men. I need a staff. That's what I need is a staff and sackcloth or some kind of robe. Play the part. Hello, gentlemen.
Good morning. Good
Morning,
morning.
Michael.
Good morning. All right, I'm interrupting. Go ahead. Don't mind me.
I apologize, everyone listening or watching this right now. If you hear an echo on my end, I'm in a brand new room.
Actually, it's a little better. It's a little
Oh,
better
is
than
it?
it was
Oh, good.
in the pre-show.
Yeah, so I'm in a new office. There's nothing behind me, so it's just pretty bare. But yeah, getting used to having my own office.
It looks bright in there.
I got the sun coming in right here.
Yeah.
Okay, so our main goal today, gentlemen, is to really focus on right sizing God. Now, obviously, we understand God's kind of a big deal. Kind of just breathed the universe into existence. He kind of just, made this world, made the oceans, formed the mountains, and yet he knows us all by name. He knows us intimately before we were even created. The issue that my pastor in my church started talking about this past Sunday was that sadly a lot of church leaders in today's day and age are making God fun size, making him small, making him so buddy that they start letting things in that should not be let in. Does that make sense?
I hear you.
It does.
So right off the bat, I'll let y'all choose. We can either start focusing on the sad truth of how many church leaders are diminishing God's size and majesty, or we can start with each of you explaining the moment in your life when you truly witnessed God's true power and majesty and might and all that.
Okay.
I'm curious. You made a reference to ministers letting things in that they shouldn't. Are we going to get into that, or is that?
Sure,
I I'm curious what you're referring to.
Well,
What
basically,
you have in mind.
when you make God like your buddy, your friend, someone who understands, it's like, oh, you're going through that temptation, you're going through that struggle. It's okay. It's okay, buddy. I'm here for you. Like, on one hand, God does know you intimately.
Are you saying he gets me, Ben?
That's fine. You can go ahead and sin a little bit.
He gets us. Oh, he gets us.
It's like, on one hand,
sorry, I'm mocking.
on one hand, God does know you intimately. He knows everything that's going on in your life, obviously. But at the same time, we also need to fear him. There needs to be a healthy dose of fear and kneeling and bowing before and like repenting and just begging for mercy. Because it's that weird balance that church leaders sadly have tended to forget God's true power and authority as they let modern things in and that they say it's okay, like homosexuality, like the church embracing social movements like Black Lives Matters, like a church supporting political movements. It's like, it's that
Okay.
that I'm talking about.
I get what you're saying. Yeah. And I, being been to a bunch of churches in my life, and it was a kind of a shocking moment when it was during the pandemic, post George Floyd, when you know we were able to, well, there was an explosion of online sermons and churches establishing, oh, we can't meet in person, so join us here. And so I was able to watch, was I don't want to mention this with my wife, it was a friend of hers, a pastor of a church in LA, and I go and she's like, oh, this is a church I used to go, a friend of mine is now pastor at this church. And so I start watching it, and this guy is all in on the BLM and I'm like, yikes, this is not the gospel this guy is preaching. He's like been totally sidetracked by his personal, he's caught up in a movement, really a deception, and the church was very heavily minority, right? It was it wasn't a black church, but it was I think more than half of the church were of different ethnic minorities, and he was, I forget what ethnicity is, Pacific Islander or something like that. But it was just like, there are people that are getting caught up in something that they think or misinterpret the spirit, right? That think, oh yeah, whiteness is evil, and that's how Satan is. I don't know. I mean, it was difficult for me to listen to this message. He was speaking very passionately, emphatically. I'm like, a couple of years ago, I could have gone to this church and listened to probably a sermon I would agree with for the most part. But now, in these crazy times, you've got people that are just misinterpreting the signs and things that are going on. And so, yeah. But to be fair, I think a lot of churches, for example, that caved to lockdowns, saw in retrospect how bad that was. So I think a lot of pastors have come to their senses, and it's been a wake-up call. And the pastors that are confessing that sin to their congregations, that's a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Joel, what examples in your life have you seen church leaders or other examples where you've seen people making God fun size, small, digestible, easy to grasp?
Yeah, it's hard to get past what Michael was just talking about. That's such a recent thing, and my church that I was going to at a time was so also in on that my wife and I actually had to leave. So just because, for the simple reason of, if for no other reason, they weren't meeting, they were forsaking the assembling of the saints, as is the habit of some, right? I mean, it's right there clearly in scripture, but we are also, and the message was, if you're not on board with this, then you're not really loving your community, and you're not, actually, you're kind of racist, actually. And and so we're like, we got to go. 2 months of online church, and we were like, forget, this is not assembling together. It's just not. And so, and that was what was that mostly based out of? It was based out of fear, and it was based on the temporal, the earthly, right? The thing I said was like, there are Christians all over the world that going to church for them is really dangerous. And we're worried about getting a little sicky poo if we go to church. These people could be beheaded or burned alive in cages or put in prison if they were lucky, if they get caught going to church. And they'll walk 8 miles, get up at 5 a.m, walk 8 miles, 80 miles, who knows, in Africa or something, just to go to church. A church that doesn't have a drum set and doesn't have a laser light show, but it's easy to have happen. And when I think about it, I'm really one of the pioneers of this problem, because back when I was in college, or actually before that, when I was a young kid, in the early 70s, late 60s, early 70s, I was at a church where we were part of the service and we were bored, and they said, we need to get these kids into something more fun. And so they put us in this little classroom with this guy with a guitar and blue jeans, and we were having fun.
Mhm.
And it's because it's got to be fun for the young people. Well, these young people like me who grew up in fun church needed to make big church fun too.
Mhm.
And yes, you do lose when you look for someone fun, when you look for entertainment or your own distractions, I guess, or whatever, and eventually turn into your own music and your own style of dress. I mean, even the way we dress. If you guys
Mhm.
notice, I always have a collar. I can't even come on one of these things without at least a collar,
Mhm.
um, because like I said, I'm one of the pioneers of casual church, of having the drums in there, having guitars. Guitars were a big thing when I
Mhm.
was in college. We had at San Diego State University, and one of the churches near that I went to, we had the university worship service, and that was a service where we would go after all the traditional services were done. We would go at 11 o'clock or 11:15, and we would have a service with guitar music, and that was really the only difference. And we were casually dressed. Um,
It's it's a fascinating subject
yeah,
because on one hand, you want to be that light to all people. You want to
yeah,
open Christ, and God to everyone. And some people literally probably can't afford to have all these extra things. But the same token, you also need to, at some point, make a decision. Okay, we've shown God as someone who knows you intimately, who will welcome you in no matter what. But at some point, we need to divert and focus on, okay, now that you're here, you need to understand God's true power, his true authority,
right.
and that his word is law. You need to understand that. So it's that balancing act that, in my life at least, I've seen church leaders having to play. I've had two pastors in my life who I think were the absolute amazing. I've had many church leaders in my life. The one I currently have, Pastor Tom Pennington at Countryside Bible Church. This guy's amazing. He spent months on Revelations. Okay. He spends so much time dissecting every single word, the historical context, the meaning, which is awesome. The other pastor that I loved and respected was back when I was in the Air Force. I was a young, stupid, sinful man. And on Wednesday nights, I would go to this fellowship, this Wednesday night worship service at this local church that was geared towards military members. This pastor was young. He was a young kid. He was like 23, 24. He just got his license. He finished his education. He had tattoos all over. But this guy covered the uncomfortable things. There were so many sermons where he was like, I'm going to make y'all uncomfortable. I'm going to cover things that y'all don't want to talk about. I'm going to talk about things that y'all want to keep away from church, but this is why we're here. I'm here to do what God shows us to do and what scripture says. And some of y'all may not like it, but that's why I'm here. Only those two pastors, to me, were the absolute best. Everyone else I've listened to or read from, they've all missed the mark because they all would much rather choose attendance, get the people in, than what's right
And
and what
that's what it,
scripture
yeah.
actually says.
And that's the motivation. It is church growth and attendance. You can't lose worshipers as a pastor. You can't lose congregation. Just, but no, and that's right. Because it was to satisfy the, I say taste. I would call it, looking back on my life, I would call it kind of my immaturities that the church was catering to. They were lowering. And it's funny, none of us dressed down because we couldn't afford to dress up. The story in the Bible of the rich person coming to church and the poor person coming in ragged clothes, and you sit down there. That poor person, that's all they could afford. That was the best. They brought their best, as everyone was kind of required to throughout Scripture. There was an expectation that you would come to God with your best. And when you come to God with your least, or when you come to church for your comfort rather than to worship God, which is really what it is, it's no surprise to me when I look back that we have lost the vision of the grandeur of God. We have let all these other things come into our churches because we lost the view of God as something bigger than us and bigger than our preferences. You know what I mean? And
Yep.
it's the same thing with the world. As the world's gotten more casual, and you could dressing is a good representation. As the world has started dressing down, also standards of the world have come down. As the church has started dressing down, it's one of the indicators that things are deteriorating in our view of ourselves in relation to God. And that's really what we're doing. We're bringing God down to our size. To me.
So God knows you intimately, but he's not your buddy. He's not your pal. He's not some dude you can just go hang out with and chill with.
Yeah.
No.
And what I referenced before, I don't know if everybody got it, but there's that movement called He Gets Us, which is, I don't know if you guys are familiar with it, but it's every Super Bowl, they always have ads. Well, listen, Jesus did this and Jesus did that. Basically, Jesus was a socialist. Jesus was a left-wing radical because he gets you. Well, he gets me in the term that in terms of I'm a wretched sinner that he needed to die for. That's how he gets me. Other than that, he's not interested in my little daily hurts and, in the way we see it as someone who gets it. He's not my boyfriend who gets me, or my significant other who gets me. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think it's a twisting of, or a manipulation of the concept of love.
Yes.
All right.
Ooh.
All right. We, and language is inherently limiting, right? We grow up in a culture with a certain vocabulary, right? A certain, we are constrained by the semantic domain in which we are, are raised. And so having one word that is used for so many different things, right? Y'all know that in Greek, there's like at least four words, more like 20 words, but there's the eros and phileo and storge and agape, right? Those are 4 different words that we all ultimately use one word for. And, God is a God of love. Yeah, but you don't know what that means, right? You don't really know what that means. Like a father who fails to discipline his son hates his son, right? It's like, wait, no, the touchy-feely, how can that be love if you're spanking? How can that doesn't feel like love? That doesn't feel good. That doesn't feel right. That it's literally, people don't understand. Love is doing the hardest things, right? And God is love. So beware. Right.
So, Michael, if you don't mind, I'm going to share my screen real quick. Speaking of language, in your best prophet accent, could you read for me some bits out of here? I'll let you choose what you want. But from like 104, 1 to 9.
I feel like I should take my hat off.
So,
now
read some parts read some parts that you think best illustrate God's true size, true power. Again, in your best prophet accent.
You put me on the spot here. That's fine. Let's see. I mean, I'd have to have read this ahead of time to pick things out. I'm just going to read 7 through 9.
Sure.
No. 8 or 6. 5 through 9. He set the earth on its foundation so that it should never be moved. You covered it with the deep as with a garment. The waters stood above the mountains. At your rebuke they fled. At the sound of your thunder they took to flight. The mountains rose, the valleys sank down to the place that you appointed for them. You set a boundary that they may not pass, so that they might not again cover the earth. That was a cold
That was
read.
an awesome prophet voice.
Cold read.
Morgan Freeman-esque.
I was telling Joel before we got started, um, there's obviously thousands of examples in Scripture of God's power. Personally, I love Psalms because Psalms to me goes to the next level. It's not just saying God made the earth and the heavens. Cool. No. He didn't just do that. Okay. This guy set the earth on its foundations. He covered it with a garment. He speaks and the earth trembles. Like he breathed stars. And he knows every single one by name. I mean, it's these things that I've said this a million times. It's hard for us to fathom, but that's the beauty of it. When you get wrecked trying to fathom God's true size, what happens? You get humbled real quick. And you realize as small as you are and as big as God is, he still sent his son for you. He still is willing to love you, even if that means a metaphorical spanking, disciplining you, putting you through things.
The wrath of God is his love, right? The wrath of God poured out on the physical form of Jesus Christ is his love. That's Jesus did it to himself, right? It's like he put himself, right? That he submitted himself. He is the one, he could have taken, in fact, he says that it's not the Father that resurrected, it was he himself that took it back up, right? And the thing that, one of the passages, every time I come to it, I just have to dwell on it, is the Mount of Transfiguration, right? Jesus is that creator God, right? He is, in Jude, it says it was Jesus who led the Israelites out of Egypt, right? In the book of Jude, it says it was Jesus himself that did it, right? He is that God of wrath who laid down himself. And the Mount of Transfiguration, what's Peter, James, and John, what's their reaction? Terror, right? They fall down on their faces and they don't know what to do. And they're like, this is incredible. We should build some structures here to memorialize this so that Moses and Elijah can hang out here, blah, blah, blah. And then when that scenario is done and Jesus is back to normal, he says to them, don't tell anyone else. Like he said, don't tell anyone else until he says to those three. And Jesus is always saying to people that he heals or whatever, is like, don't tell anyone else, don't tell anyone else. And I think there's different reasons that he says that don't tell anyone. In some instances, it's he knows that the crowds will get bigger and thicker and he won't be able to move about freely, right? Don't tell anyone because I want to be able to move freely and reach more people. That's one case. There's another case where he says, actually with the Gadarene demoniac that he delivers the legion of demons from, he does not say don't tell anyone, he says go and tell. And I think in that instance, in contrast to another one where like Jesus raises this guy's daughter from the dead and says don't tell anyone, in those two contrasting instances, I think it's for their own good. Like this daughter who's raised, who is dead, if you go out and tell everybody, you become famous, right? And fame can destroy people, right? Fame will, it's a life-changing thing when you go from anonymity to fame. People aren't ready for it. But in the case of the Gadarene demoniac, where he says, go and tell everyone, that guy was already famous, right? Everybody knew that this guy's a demon-possessed guy, and he didn't have anything else in his life. He was just isolated. And now he's sitting at Jesus' feet in his right mind. He says, go and tell, because he's been so radically transformed. It's not going to affect him in a negative way. In fact, it will only be positive because of his testimony. But in this case, on the Mount of Transfiguration, he says, don't tell anyone. I think he's speaking specifically to the inner circle, the other disciples. I think it's because they think they're crazy, We just saw Jesus transform into light, and everything, from his inner being, it shone through his clothes, that even his clothes look brighter than snow. And Jesus says, don't tell anybody, because he's giving them a glimpse of that judge, that creator, father. The Father is in him, and he is in the Father, and he's giving that glimpse to them. And he's like, people aren't going to quite get it. They're just going to think you're lunatics if you tell them that. But after I resurrect, they'll get it. So you can tell them then. And so, I don't know. That was all tangential.
Well, yeah, it also would have put a different expectation. That it wasn't his mission to do all that. His mission was to come and die. He said, I came to die.
Yep.
So, oh, excuse me, I got to sneeze. Go take it, guys.
Here comes.
His mission, his mission wasn't to become popular. The mission wasn't to get
Bless
the most
you.
people.
Bless you.
Sorry, I'm always afraid this will happen during one of these things. The first time it has.
Got to hit that mute button real quick.
Yeah, I know. I couldn't quite find it. I'm not the broadcast professional that you are. So, thank you,
Bless
Jerry.
So yeah, his mission wasn't to gain popularity points.
Right.
His mission was not to see what the newest thing was and then do what that thing is. No.
Well, and yeah. Oh, sorry to interrupt, but just the fact that he came. I think in the birth story of Jesus, there was, when he came down, something to the effect that all heaven was singing and rejoicing and praising God, because, like, wait a minute, he became one of them. Nobody saw that coming. The whole idea of a creator God, back then, and who were the gods back then? Zeus, Apollo, whatever, the Greek gods versus the Roman gods, whatever. They were as fault as what would you call it? Fault, had made as many faults as we did, if not more so. They ate their children and they had sex with whatever. Yeah. And adultery and violence, whatever. They were not really that different from us. But here's the perfect, true God that laid the foundations of the earth. For some reason, created these little puny, tiny beings, and for some reason, he's invested in them. That was miracle enough that he even considers them. But for him to become one of them and go down and join them, that blew all heaven away. So it even goes beyond, just this is who I really am, which even magnified the miracle of him coming in that corporal body and then to die, to actually put himself in under death, which he didn't create death, we did. Adam's sin brought death into the world. He even subjected himself to that. So, yeah.
A good litmus test for churches today and church leaders, in my view, to wrap this all up, if Christ came to your church, would that church actually let him in? Sadly, a lot of churches today wouldn't.
Depends on how he's dressed.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's just something to think about. Everyone who's listening, everyone who's watching, the church you go to, I hope it's good. I hope your fellowship is strong. I hope your leaders are wise. But ask yourself, would they actually let Christ in? Would they actually do that?
I do want to say something in our last few seconds here. As Joel referenced earlier, forsake not the assembling of yourselves together. So don't make a preacher that you may disagree with be the reason you forsake going, right? Inject yourself into the leadership structure. If you see real flaws, and that's a church that you believe you're called to, go and make the difference. Go and challenge the pastor, challenge their theology, challenge their stance on things. And then if they reject you, brush the dust off your feet. Leave that house, right? That's what we're called to. All right. We're done.
Time's over. Goes too fast all the time.
Yeah, it does.
It's been an absolute joy.
It goes fast.
I will see you guys week after next.
Yes. Happy August.
That's right. Week after next. I'll be there.
All right.
Thanks, guys.
Take care.
Bye, everybody. God is in control.